Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. On today's show, just days after taking centre stage at the coronation of King Charles III, the Archbishop of Canterbury has labelled the government's plans to permanently punish illegal migrants as morally unacceptable and politically impractical. Immigration solicitor Jennifer Obaseki will be joining me from here in the capital to tell us why. And at least 400 people have died and over 5,000 remain missing after devastating floods and landslides hit the Democratic Republic of Congo last week. The DRC is one of the most infrastructurally challenged countries in the world, and there have been calls asking for leaders on the continent to do more to mitigate the impacts caused by natural disasters. Brigitte Tilly-Guiado, the founder and CEO of GAN International, will be joining me shortly for her insights. And then later, as leaders prepare to celebrate World Fair Trade Day this weekend, life is anything but fair for cocoa farmers in Ghana. According to a new report published by the charity Oxfam, chocolate corporations' sustainability programs are failing to deliver on promises to raise farmers' income. The author of the report, Uwe Knighting, who is also a senior researcher at Oxfam, will be joining me shortly from Accra in Ghana to shed more light on this story. But first, let's start the show with a story that has built up over the past few weeks concerning Britain's beleaguered High Street. On Wednesday, Dame Sharon White, the chairwoman of the John Lewis Partnership, survived a confidence vote concerning her leadership during a meeting with senior executives. The 56-year-old has come under increasing pressure recently as losses at the famous brand, which also owns Waitrose, ballooned to £234 million in the retail group's latest results. In a non-binding vote, the Partnership Council voted to support White in continuing her leadership, but was critical of her latest financial performance. In other news now, did you watch it? Operation Golden Orb, as the crowning of King Charles and Queen Camilla has been called, is estimated to have cost the British taxpayer somewhere between £100 and £250 million, with the vast majority of the public purse going towards security. Taking place amid the cost of living crisis facing the UK and against a backdrop of strikes by doctors over pay, the King's coronation has been branded a waste of taxpayers' money by critics. A YouGov survey found that 51% of adults believe the ceremony should not have been funded by the government. Well, for more on the cost of the King's coronation, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, it's nice to see you again. Of course, we're in the City of London today. We're not outside Buckingham Palace. I've barely recovered from coronation coverage. But of course, as to be expected, Project or Operation Golden Orb is under the spotlight this week because, of course, it was a beautiful ceremony, lots of pomp and pageantry, lots of expense, but it was taking place amid a backdrop of a cost of living crisis and severe industrial action across many sectors. Lots of people counting the cost of the coronation, and they don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that was the balance that the royal family had to get right, and what King Charles had to get right was that it was a slimmed down ceremony, it was a slimmed down parade, it was nothing quite as grand as his mother's. And I think a lot of that was to try and represent the UK, so there was a much more diverse mix of people within Westminster Abbey than you might have seen 70 years ago. There was gospel choirs, you wouldn't have seen that 70 years ago. So they were trying to strike that balance, but as you say, there were people who were protesting, and there's issues around whether they, people being arrested for protesting.
Yeah, the police have apologised, haven't they?
They have, the Met Police. So there's always issues around that, and I think the royal family know that there are anti-monarchists out there and people who disagree with having a royal family, disagree with the hundreds of millions that was spent on that occasion, and I think it's quite hard. 70 years ago, a lot of those photos were in black and white, right? And coronations before, everything's in black and white. I think it really draws focus when you look at the remarkable colours that everyone was wearing. It
the
almost
gold,
looks
the splendour.
Pretty ridiculous what they were wearing and how it all unfolded. But I think generally, if you look back, the day couldn't have gone much better, right? There was no real disruption, there was no huge scandal. I think it passed off pretty well, and I think it did draw the country together, bring the country together for a bank holiday, and I think most people celebrated it. But you're always going to get people that say, and rightly so, maybe, was this worth it? Is the money and the expense worth it? But of course, the royal family then does bring in a lot of money. So a lot of tourism and Americans and people around the world love this kind of thing, and it is good soft power for the UK to push out to other corners of the world. Hundreds of millions of people tuning in for that coronation. So I think it works both ways, really. The balance needed to be struck, and I think they got it just about right.
Yeah, I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what the data is about that bank holiday, because, of course, we're going to be having 3 bank holidays in May, and we know they always
It loses money, yeah.
Exactly. A story that is slightly related, but not. The royal family, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, he's been in the headlines this week, not because of his blinking you'll miss it appearance in Westminster Abbey on Saturday, but because, of course, he's brought a 3rd civil trial against what some people call the toxic British media. Not so much now, but what it was like in the 90s, just before we entered newsrooms. And it's the Mirror news group, the News of the World, now defunct, and others. Piers Morgan, a name we are showing his picture now, a lot of people may be familiar with. He's been accused of illegally hacking phones. A lot's coming out in the wash, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's really taken this personally, Harry. He's really going to war against the press. He, of course, blames them for the death of his mother. Yeah. He blames them for lots of things, especially also the breakup of one of his relationships with someone called Chelsea Davy, and of course things like attacking Meghan. And we talk about Piers Morgan. Well, his main topic seems to be attacking Meghan and Harry. He seems to have been doing it for years, and so Harry is taking this very, very personally, and it's a real personal vendetta. He's turning up at the court. He's really the face of
because it's not just him, is it? There are other celebrities.
There's Elton John. And, the Prince William has also taken on the press in his own way, but he's not turning up at court. He's not the face of it. And I think Harry, this really is the main thing that he wants to do at the moment, is to take on the press and win these court cases. And they're going to get huge payouts, of course. But I think the main thing for him is to really get vengeance on what he thinks was a huge lack of privacy in his childhood. His phone was hacked on numerous occasions, and he says there was a huge breakdown in relationships that he had with friends and with ex-girlfriends as a result of this. And of course, Princess Diana and Charles, there was a wedge between those two as well, created by the press and the media. The BBC not at fault, very much at fault for that as well. So yes, it's really interesting to see him doing this, and he does come over to the UK often now, simply to walk into court and listen to these cases. So the Mirror group has apologised. They've said his phone was hacked on one occasion, but Harry's going after them for hundreds of occasions. Yeah. So they're looking at a really big payout, and they've obviously got a case to answer for, and we've seen it, like you say, with many, many other celebrities. So yes, it's really Harry versus Piers at the moment, and who knows what Piers's position will be like in the future. At the moment, he's heading lots of different TV programmes and columns, and he's got his own shows, but it's going to be hard for him to necessarily continue at such a high level if it really does turn out that he knew about this and that he sanctioned this phone hacking.
Yes, of course, we're going to be following that story because it's huge and it's likely to bring down some major players here in the UK. Simon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In other news now, the Archbishop of Canterbury has made a rare intervention in the House of Lords to criticise the Conservative government's illegal migration bill as it faces its first test in the upper chamber. Justin Welby argues against the flagship legislation aimed at ensuring people who arrive in the UK in small boats would be detained and promptly removed, either to their home country or a third country such as Rwanda. Well, for a detailed assessment on what this means for you and your loved ones, I'm now being joined by immigration solicitor Jennifer Obaseki. She joins me from here in the British capital. Jennifer Obaseki, as always, it's a pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global today. Well, just a couple of days after coronating King Charles III, we've had the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, addressing members of the House of Lords, talking about this illegal immigration bill, which I know we've discussed extensively on this programme. He's described it as being morally unacceptable and politically impractical. Do you agree with him?
Oh, good morning. Thanks for having me on your programme again. And the Archbishop is a man of the cloth, and he speaks as a humanitarian. And the fact is, it is such a challenging bill. We have the issue with regard to people coming over on small boats, but politically it's difficult to see how the government will hold its position by meeting its international obligations in operating this bill. There is a lot of concern, and quite rightly so, because we have refugees mixed up with people who are economic migrants who are being exploited? How will you determine the two? And how will the UK ensure it is meeting its international obligations? It can't be right that certain refugees will be given homes and others will be put on planes to leave the country. Giving help shouldn't be determinant upon what your ethnicity is. So he's right to be concerned.
You're absolutely right there. And I know we have had you on several times, so apologies if it feels like you're repeating yourself. But just to be clear, Jennifer, there are some legal routes for our viewers watching who may wish to start a new life in the UK. Can you just tell us what are the legal routes available? Because that's one of the fears, that we're closing the doors to everyone, but surely we're not. People can still come here if you're not a nurse or a teacher.
Definitely. Yes, you can come into the UK as a student. You can come as a visitor. There are certain routes that are there for graduates. There are certain routes that are there for workers. Obviously, if you're coming into the UK as a worker, you must come in and be employed by somebody who has a sponsorship license. You must ensure you outline the terms of your employment before you leave. You can also come in, let me say, as an explorer. Come in as a visitor. Make sure that you are investigating the industry or the field you want to go into. There's also provisions for professionals who might be here on sabbaticals to do research. There are investment routes into the UK. Once again, rather than give money to all these agents that are plotting with, ingenuous means of you getting here, put that money together as a family, register a company, and then employ that person to come into the UK as an overseas worker of sorts. There are many different routes in which you could do that. I am often, let me say, so mind-boggled by people who give money to fake agents or agents who make promises, whereas all that money and that effort could go into progressing a genuine route into the United Kingdom or into Europe.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And sorry, Dr. Jennifer, for interjecting there, but it does bring me nicely on to my next question, the point you were just raised, because according to some of the data, Nigeria is the third largest migrant group here in the UK. This is after India and China, I believe. But as you quite rightly said, especially over the past couple of years, we are starting to see some pretty frightening stories, actually, about the treatment of Nigerians when they get here. What are some of the red flags that you've seen?
Yes, definitely. You have to be careful. All that glitters is not gold. If it sounds too good to be true, it genuinely usually is a trap or a situation which you should not go into. Make sure that the company that is employing you or making this offer has the sponsorship license. Make sure it's not an agency that's not just taken your money and presented you with a package. Also, make sure that you have understood the rules around your leave to remain. If you think that you've been granted entry, then suddenly you can start jumping to America or producing papers to go somewhere else. And especially if the papers you produce are not genuine, you might find yourself in problems. So if you present papers to go to Canada of a job offer or of your company maybe sending you on some kind of field trip, and if any of that is untrue, you could find yourself in prison. Here in the UK, the rules are very stringent and the law is applied not according to who you know. It's applied according to the letter of the law. So you could find yourself in serious trouble if you breach the rules. The other thing is, you have to be careful. On the horizon, we're hearing that people who come in to do master's programs may no longer be allowed to bring in their dependents. Wow, so you have to also watch out because immigration rules change.
Yes.
So that's the other thing you have to be aware of. You have to be aware of changes that are on the horizon. And then finally, you have to be aware of the cost of living and the difference in your balance of quality of life, let me say. When you come to the UK, you might get taken up by the cycle of work-life balance that means that it might impact on your own personal well-being and mental health.
Jennifer Obaseki, solicitor and the founder, of course, of Obaseki Solicitors, which is one of the leading immigration firms that we have here in the United Kingdom. Thank you, as always, for your time, which I must point out, was free today. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, with more than 400 people dead and over 5,000 still missing, the latest devastating floods in the DRC has led to calls asking for leaders on the continent to do more to mitigate against the impacts caused by natural disasters in Africa. Bridget Tilly-Guiado, the founder and CEO of GAN International, will be joining me shortly for her insights. And with World Fair Trade Day fast approaching, a new report from the charity Oxfam suggests that chocolate corporations' sustainability programs are failing to deliver on promises to raise farmers' incomes. Uwe Knighting, senior researcher at the charity, will be joining me from Accra to shed some more light on this story. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. According to international observers, the DRC is one of the most infrastructurally challenged countries in the world. Ground transportation has always been difficult, and the country's vast geography, low population density, extensive forests, and criss-crossing rivers further complicate the development of infrastructure networks. As aid organisations struggle to reach those impacted by the recent intense flooding and landslides that hit the South Kivu province last week, there have been calls asking for leaders on the continent to do more to mitigate the impacts caused by natural disasters. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Brigitte Tilly-Guiado, the founder and CEO of GAN International. She joins me now from London. Brigitte Tilly-Guiado, it's a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. I know you're a lady that is known pretty much across the continent and in the United Kingdom, but it's the first time I'm actually speaking to you on Channel's Business Global. So thank you so much for taking your time out to speak with me today. Unfortunately, we are going to be talking about a pretty serious issue, because I believe the death count from the recent heavy floods in the DRC has reached over 400. There are about 5,500 people missing. And whilst, of course, we recognise the unpredictable nature of natural disasters, I think observers now are saying that, Africa have got to get mitigation right. The infrastructure is just not there. Do you think we're ready to have these kind of conversations so soon after such a loss of life?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, lovely to speak with you, Juliana. I'm a huge fan, and of course, this is an issue that we are looking very closely at. We are more than ready to have this discussion. I think that it's very prevalent all across the world right now. We're seeing natural disasters everywhere, and infrastructure, especially sustainable infrastructure, is the key to mitigate these risks. We can take examples from success stories, for example, in Greece, where we have seen companies, private sector companies like Intracat, ensuring that they have disaster warning and flood mitigation built into their infrastructure. And we definitely need to do this across Africa. Climate change is the pressing issue of our era. And of course, it does not discriminate. And it does not give warning before it strikes. Africa is, of course, no stranger to this. The Sahara Desert was, in fact, green at one point. So we definitely need to build in infrastructure to it, sustainable infrastructure into absolutely everything we do on the continent.
Absolutely. I know the Invest Africa conference has been taking place in London this week, and some of the big conversations are all about sustainable infrastructure and development on the continent. We know big projects are taking place because, of course, Africa's got to be developed for us to untap the potential that we have there. Do you welcome news of an expansion of Kigali airport? This is, of course, in Rwanda. It's costing them about $2 billion. It's expected to be up and running in 2026. Would you like to see more huge, large-scale projects like this being undertaken in Africa? Is GAN International involved in any of these?
We absolutely are. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And this is why we've created our company, specifically to aid Africa in its development through infrastructure. We love what's going on with Kigali Airport at the moment. It's not unique, but it's not enough. we need more projects like this throughout the continent.
Because you are a thought leader, I do want to get in my last question, if I can, very briefly answer it for me, if you are able. We know that the story of Africa's development is changing constantly. You've referred to some of the historic issues we've had. Where are we in that story right now? Do we find a happy ending if sort of thing exists?
I will echo myself. The future is what we create. I'm a firm believer of that. So we are absolutely poised to, I believe, be a global leader in infrastructure development should we get the funding required. So we've got to think about things like green bonds. We've got to think about alternative and innovative financing solutions. We've got to take best in case practice from across the world, both Chinese and non-Chinese players in infrastructure. And we can absolutely do it. In fact, we exist so that we can do it. So I think the future is bright, and the future is definitely African. So we've just got to get the financing right, and we're on our way.
We are on our way. You said the future is bright. I was waiting for you to say future is orange. I don't know if our viewers are old enough.
Red. I think it's quite red. It's quite clearly red, as we're both wearing red today.
Absolutely. Bridget Tilly-Gyado, founder and CEO of GAN International. There are so many other titles we could have put there, but you're being modest today. Thank you so much, Bridget, for joining me on Channels Business Global.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Pleasure.
Now to our final story. World Fair Trade Day is being celebrated this weekend, and its purpose is to celebrate the contributions to the fight against poverty, exploitation and climate change in the lucrative trade industry. Despite efforts from various charitable movements across the globe, there are still thousands of people currently working in unfavourable conditions and being paid poorly by large corporations. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Uwe Knighting, a senior researcher at Oxfam. Uwe Knighting, it's a pleasure to have you on Channels Business Global today. So World Fair Trade Day is being celebrated this weekend. Goodness me, it brings back so many memories. I think anybody who lives in the UK would have heard about it. I know it's actually been going since the 40s, obviously very much known for trying to combat poverty, particularly amongst small farm holders. Yet according to a new report which has been authored by you on behalf of Oxfam, we still have a long way to go in protecting African farmers. Can you talk to us about what some of your findings disclosed?
Yeah, absolutely. The findings really highlight the exploding inequality that we are seeing in the global cocoa sector. And those findings really are threefold. On the one hand, you really have a downward pressure on the incomes of farmers over the past 3 years, which is the time that we looked at. And those are rooted or caused by an increase in cost of production, a decrease in productivity, which of course are interrelated. And so as a result, we had 9 out of 10 farmers that we talked to tell us that they're worse off than they were just 3 years ago. And also we found an average and decline of 16% in income of the farmers that we talked to.
It is difficult to realise, but it's also a really difficult job. It's backbreaking, and it's generally women, isn't it? And very young people who are harvesting this cocoa for us to all enjoy. Oxfam are urging chocolate giants, the big corps, to significantly raise farm gate prices paid to cocoa farmers. I know you've been talking a lot, Uwe, but are they listening?
I think they slowly are. And that is really why we are putting out this report and this press release today, because we do think we're in a pivotal moment to talk about price and to really make a difference. Yeah. Just a few years ago, you couldn't really touch the topic of cocoa prices. Companies didn't want to talk about it. Today, they do want to talk about it. They acknowledge it's an important piece of the equation of raising farmer incomes. However, the action is still missing. And that is why we're thinking about mobilizing a bit more of public attention to this issue to then also get companies to act.
Absolutely, it's very important. Just very lastly and briefly, Uwe, before you go, why do you think, what came up in the report to show why it's been more difficult in the past 3 weeks? Of course, we can all say the pandemic has changed our lives, but what specifically about the COVID lockdowns impacted the incomes for these farmers?
Well, first it was COVID, and then it was actually the war in Ukraine and the resulting economic crisis, which, for example, caused the prices of fertilizers, which Ghanaian cocoa farmers rely on, to explode by up to 200%. And that, again, combined with some longer-term impacts like the effects of climate change, really kind of put a lot of pressure over these past 3 years on farmers.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult plight for these farmers, and we thank you for your research, and of course for Oxfam for highlighting the story. TV stations like Channels, the largest in the emerging markets, will always highlight these stories because it affects our communities so much. Uwe Knighting, senior researcher at Oxfam and also the author of this pretty frightening report. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.